robbing the South of its laborers weakens the rebellion.
What will become of these ignorant, illiterate, newly emancipated black freedmen? Will they not turn into roving bands of bloodthirsty criminals, terrorizing the veterans, murdering and wreaking havoc? So much for your moral crusades!
Hey everyone, my name is David. Welcome to Church Visit number 21 of 52 churches in 52 weeks, round 3. 47 churches ago, not sure if that's how I'm supposed to start this. I tried to get this top hat into my car here, but with the roof, that was not happening. But all joking aside, as I record this, it is October 2024. We are about a month away from voting in the polls for this year's presidential election in the United States. And, they always say don't mix religion and politics, but for this video, I could not resist. So for this one, we're going to take a look inside First Presbyterian Church in Springfield, Illinois. This church has significance because before he became the 16th president of the United States, Abraham Lincoln called this his house of worship for over a decade. Earlier this year, I was researching a number of historical churches that might be interesting to visit, and I really started to go down a rabbit hole into the churches that have been attended by U.S. presidents. So a part of me was curious what some of these look like today. So obviously, the church that was attended by Abraham Lincoln was at the very top of my list. And I was a bit surprised to learn that there's debate among many scholars whether Abraham Lincoln was truly a Christian or not. So I guess when he first was running for president, he was heavily criticized for his faith because he never officially joined a church, even though that he had attended this First Presbyterian Church for over a decade. So, but at the same point, after he did become president, he referenced biblical scripture in many of his most famous speeches. So what exactly was this complicated faith journey of Abraham Lincoln's? So I found First Presbyterian Church in Springfield, Illinois. The Lincolns attended this church from 1850 to 1861 before Lincoln became president. And with this particular church, they moved to a different building since, but they still promote themselves as Lincoln's church. Even when you walk in, you can actually see the pew that the Lincoln family sat in on Sunday mornings. So one of Lincoln's most famous quotes is, "A house divided cannot stand." With this channel, I try to do the same thing no matter your faith background for a common cause. So for this third round of 52 and 52, we're doing a fundraiser for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. As you'll learn in this video, the Lincolns had a number of setbacks, especially with the health of their children. And with St. Jude's, what they try to do is they help families who have children that are going through life-threatening illnesses. So far, we've raised over $17,000. Our goal by the 52nd and final church is to have hit $52,000. So for everyone that has said prayers or has donated, want to say thank you very much for your help and support for this amazing cause. But sit tight. We're going to take a look inside First Presbyterian Church and what it sounded like inside. I'll be back to share much more about Abraham Lincoln's faith journey in just a moment. Before we dive into Abraham Lincoln's spiritual life, I just have to mention Deep River that was sung here at First Presbyterian Church. I don't know about you, but anytime I hear a musical solo in church, it's an absolute treat. So to hear this particular song, it was just so rich, it was powerful, it had soul. Afterwards, I had to take a look to understand, like, where did Deep River come from? Because it was such a powerful song, but I never heard it before. So Deep River is what's called a spiritual. It's an African-American genre of Christian music that basically borrows from the experiences of the slave trade with African cultural influences. So spirituals encompass these work songs or plantation songs that have evolved now to blues or gospel music sung in Southern churches. So oftentimes, especially prior to the Civil War, these songs were oral traditions that were handed down through the generations, and it just were amazing songs that people would sing during these difficult times. So Deep River taps into this longing for deliverance, physical and spiritual, because it just reflects so many different kind of biblical stories of the oppressed being delivered from oppression. And, obviously the big parallel, the big mirror that you can take from the Bible is Israel escaping the bondages of slavery from Egypt. And with the Deep River, like even with Israel and the Israelites, like they have to go through water to reach their freedom, to reach their liberty. And with Deep River, like it just touched into that in just such a powerful, deep, emotional type of experience through music. Learning about Abraham Lincoln's religious journey, it really started to make me wonder. I don't think there could have been anyone else more well suited to handle the country and the affairs more so than Abraham Lincoln, because he was just very pragmatic. He was very logical thinking, and he didn't succumb to his emotions. And that could be said as well for his spiritual life and his spiritual journey. So for this visit, I went and worshiped first at First Presbyterian Church in Springfield, Illinois, right in the downtown area. This is not the same church building that the Lincolns attended, but they still do have the pew that the Lincolns sat in when they attended this church. Nowadays, First Presbyterian Church, it's much more welcoming, much more affirming. So as you can see in the earlier montage, it's not like it was 150 years ago. In addition to that, after church service, I then went to the Abraham Lincoln Museum. So a number of images or information I obtained from visiting that. And if you tell, like one thing, this museum had to be one of the best historical museums I've ever been a part of. And after visiting this, like just things hit different. Growing up, Abraham Lincoln's parents were hard-shell Baptists. They got swept up in the Second Great Awakening and the revivalist experiences at that time, especially where they lived in Kentucky and Indiana in the early 19th century. So as a result, a young Abe was seeing all these emotional conversion experiences. That was kind of his first foray into religion. So his family attended Little Creek Baptist Church. I've also seen it called Pigeon Creek Baptist Church. I guess Baptist churches at that time were loosely organized, so you could have had multiple variations of the name of a church. So they attended that from 1816 to 1830. Eventually they moved, and I guess the area that they moved to didn't have a church for a very long time. So with Abraham Lincoln, like he was very well versed in knowing the Bible, but there's parts early on in his childhood and in his teenage years and in his 20s where sometimes he would mock the Bible. And as you look more into his history, you see that he was very conflicted as a young man. His mom died when he was 9 or 10 years old. His closest sibling, his sister, died when he was 16. And probably one thing that also had a big influence on him was the death of his first love, Anne Rutledge. They were both in their 20s, and she suffered a fever and passed away. So there's a part where many look at that and kind of see maybe Abraham Lincoln had some anger towards God because he was losing people that were just so close to him at such an early age. Eventually, Abraham Lincoln did get married. He married Mary Todd in 1842. He was 33, she was 23. And I guess it was a very up and down courtship. But when they did get married, they settled in Springfield, Illinois, and they had 4 boys, Robert, Eddie, Willie, and Tad. Unfortunately, in 1850, Eddie died at the age of 4, and apparently it was just in pure agony. This seems to have been a turning point for the Lincoln family, so they sought out a church and settled on First Presbyterian Church. Mary Todd Lincoln was very involved and was an active participant here. And it was here also that Abraham Lincoln met Pastor James Smith. So Pastor James Smith, he was an intellectually rigorous minister. And he seemed to have a profound influence on Abraham Lincoln's religious outlook moving forward. Because with Pastor James Smith, he was logical, he was philosophical, he was a thinker's man, especially when it came to how he approached the Bible and religion. So this was a huge contrast to what Abraham Lincoln had experienced with his parents, with all the revivalist movements and the emotional type of expressivism, if that's a word, that he had seen when he was a younger boy. So as a result, it allowed Abraham Lincoln to be pragmatic, to think about things, and it allowed him to respect religious doctrines, all the while remaining skeptical about different type of orthodox views. So overall, Pastor James Smith had a big impact on Abraham Lincoln and how he moved forward, especially when he did become president. So eventually, Abraham Lincoln was elected president and he took office in 1861. And as you can see from the onset of this video, it's haunting to hear and see and just put yourself in the shoes just a little bit of Abraham Lincoln during that time, because he was just hearing so many voices inside his ears about what to do, especially with the Emancipation Letter and, how the country was going to go to war. So as I have been researching church history and just understanding more about things, it has been a bit conflicting for myself to kind of see the moral justification that was being preached at the pulpits and just how the Bible was being interpreted in vastly different ways that could lead to a civil war. So on the Union side, you had the preachers and the pastors who were using the Bible as a crusade to end slavery, to bring freedom and to bring justice. In my last round of 52 churches in 52 weeks, for my church visit number 40, I went to Beecher's Bible and Rifle Church just outside Wamego, Kansas. And with Henry Ward Beecher, he was preaching on the East Coast, and he was just using these fiery sermons to rally support for the Union cause. So it was so strong that some people decided that they would move to Kansas. They would pioneer to Kansas just so that they could cast a vote for that state, so that it could be a free state and not a slave state. So as a result, as they're traveling, like they didn't have any weapons to defend themselves. So the idea was brought that they would send in Beecher's Bibles and rifles, where the rifles were underneath the Bibles, to get to this group so they could defend themselves as part of the Underground Railroad. But on the flip side, you also had the Confederate side, and they also had ministers who were, I want to say Robert Louis Dabney, and also James Hurley Thornwell, if I'm saying those right. And they were also preaching about how the Northern aggression was going to end Christian civilization, and how it mentions in the Bible that slavery is fine, and that's a part of the way that the world works. So as a result, like Abraham Lincoln is in this very bizarre situation, and it really kind of makes me wonder how his Christian life, how his religious upbringing, thinking more rationally, being more pragmatic, and just how he viewed the Bible, how he was able to incorporate that in such a turbulent time. I've heard from some other videos that Lincoln believed in what was called universal salvation. So there's one point where he overheard some soldiers talking, some mentioning how some people are going to go to heaven, some people are going to go to hell. And he mentions it's either all or none. To see how pragmatic that he was during this time frame, I just don't know who else could have been president in such a calm demeanor type of approach to things. One quote that I really liked to really kind of explain how he was handling his politics at that point was, "I destroy my enemies by making them my friend." So as I kind of see that quote and just how to incorporate that even in today's day and age, where before it may have been North versus South, nowadays with politics, we have left versus right. So it's like, how do you destroy your enemies? By making them your friends, because that way it's just such a better conversation to understand and just look at the white in the eyes of those across from you. As I was preparing to do this video, I started to watch a few other YouTube videos talking about Lincoln and his faith life. And there's one video that I watched, I can't remember the name of it, but it really just opened up my ears because the narrator mentions that Baptists were killing Baptists, Presbyterians were killing Presbyterians, Catholics were killing Catholics. And yet all these churches, all these denominations subscribed to Jesus Christ as their Savior. However, they still went to war and caused bloodshed. And it's like, where is the Christ-like influence being found in a time like that? So with Abraham Lincoln, I had to review some of his most famous addresses, and one of them was the second inauguration address, and it just kind of projects just the complex religious views that he had at that point. And it's almost like he was speaking of the Civil War in religious terms and suggesting that the war was kind of a form of divine punishment for the sins of slavery. I think with Lincoln's use of religious language, it was just so carefully measured. It was so pragmatic. And it wasn't trying to appeal to a certain denomination or a certain church or a particular sect. It was almost like he was trying to invoke a sense of duty, a moral compass for the nation as a whole. So that brings me to April 14th, 1865. Abraham and Mary Todd Lincoln are watching a play at the Ford's Theater. And behind a door comes a Confederate sympathizer, shoots Abraham Lincoln, and the next day Abraham Lincoln succumbs to the bullet. And according to Mary Todd Lincoln, their last conversation talked about plans that they were going to have after the presidency when the nation had calmed down a bit. And from what it sounds like, per her account, they were talking about plans to vacation in Jerusalem so that they could walk the same place that Jesus Christ had walked. So, for all the talk about Abraham Lincoln, what was his faith? Was he truly a Christian? I don't know of too many people who had to have faith. They had to have faith to go through what he did during just the absolute worst time in our nation's history. So for them to talk about walking where Jesus Christ had walked, that's powerful. I didn't mention a whole lot about my worship experience at First Presbyterian Church. And I think a part of that is just because, there was just a few things that stood out. One was Deep River that was sung, obviously. But then another thing was a portrait that I saw. So I asked a number of questions. I walked up to the balcony and got to see their pipe organ. And one gentleman really wanted to show me their Tiffany stained glass windows. So Louis Comfort Tiffany had to be one of the best stained glass window manufacturers at that time period when they made these, late 19th century, early 20th century. So prominent families within that church had commissioned to have some of these windows done. There's only one male figure. The others are these angelic female figures. And the one gentleman wanted to show me, like, I guess Louis Comfort Tiffany, I think, autographed one of the windows. But it wasn't the elaborate, beautiful windows that really impressed me as much as what was in the narthex. Because in the narthex was this framed picture of Abraham Lincoln, Mary Todd Lincoln, and three of their boys with Robert, Willie, and Tad. And they're all kind of looking down, and it looks like they're singing a hymn or they're reading the Bible. And that image was that imprinted in me. So afterwards, I went to the Abraham Lincoln Museum, and, everything is more focused on Abraham Lincoln, but it wasn't him that I left thinking about. I left thinking about Mary Todd Lincoln much more so, because to me, learning about what she had to go through as a wife and a mother to lose her husband, who served as a president, just the biggest challenges that a president had ever faced, if not still to this day. And then in addition to that, she had to bury three of her sons before she died. So Eddie died early on, Willie died during their time in the White House, and then Tad passed away a few years after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. And there's this one area in the museum where she is just dressed in black, and she just looks off in just this distant look. And it just pained me to see. And it was weird because it's like I'm looking at a mannequin, But to see how her faith, how she had to navigate her grief and her pain, and how she was the emotional collateral damage for a nation that had been torn apart, and to lose just everything, everyone that she loved. Like she went a little off the rails. How did her Christian faith impact her? How did her experiences of loss and grief get her through? So what I learned is, one of those last conversations that she had with Abraham Lincoln was about going to Jerusalem. She eventually did make that trip 5 years later, not with Abraham, but with herself as a widow. And it just makes me wonder just what was she wrestling with as she's finally walking where Jesus Christ walked, but she's doing it without her husband. And, a big part of me, obviously Lincoln's legacy touched me during this visit, and I hope it touched you, kind of learning a little bit about what he did and what he had to suffer through himself. But with Mary Todd Lincoln, she had to go through some quiet endurance herself. And I think for any of us, like, she can serve as a reminder of our own faith and just how often deeply personal, and just how faith is just such an evolving journey.